Come on, how do you buy a battleship for $9,000? This is one of the wildest restorations ever. People lose everything on rusted hulks, but a few pull off the impossible and end up sailing a piece of history. I want to show you exactly how I did it, and what we found hidden inside that could have changed everything. How do you resurrect a warship from scrap? Here we go. I'm Mark, and last year I found a listing that seemed like a joke. An entire Iowa-class battleship, the USS Valor, sitting in a bankrupt salvage yard in Mobile, Alabama. Frank, the old yard owner, just wanted it gone. $9,000 and she was mine. All 887 feet of rust, 3 decks of shattered equipment, and 16-inch guns frozen in place. But while we were cutting through a watertight door nobody had opened in 30 years, we found something that the Navy had tried to erase. The door led into a sealed compartment behind the forward turret barbette, a space that officially did not exist on any Navy blueprint. Inside, a rusted filing cabinet held a stack of classified routing sheets dated 1987, with a single stamped order, Reactivation Protocol Sierra 7. That ship should have been nothing but scrap metal. Instead, someone had brought her back to life once already, and the Navy had buried every record of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what we stumbled into, you need to know what I was facing when I first stepped onto that deck. The Valor had been sitting in brackish water for 14 years. The main deck was so corroded you could punch a screwdriver through the steel. Every porthole was smashed, every hatch had been welded shut to keep scavengers out, and the interior smelled like a flooded basement mixed with diesel and dead rats. Frank told me the salvage yard had stripped the easy metals years ago: copper wiring, brass fittings, anything they could sell for quick cash. What remained was 60,000 tons of ruined engineering that nobody wanted to touch. I posted a walkthrough video online the day after I bought it. Within 48 hours, a Marine welder named Patricia showed up at the gate. She'd spent 12 years repairing tankers and barges, and she told me she'd always wanted to work on a warship. I couldn't afford to pay her a real salary, so we made a deal. She'd get a cut if we ever turned the ship into something profitable. We started with the hull, replacing thousands of rivets and patching holes below the waterline so the old pumps could actually keep her dry. Patricia worked 14-hour days in coveralls and a respirator, burning through steel plate faster than I could order it. But here's the thing no one tells you about restoring a battleship. The ship isn't just a hunk of metal, it's a weapons platform. The 16-inch guns might look like rusted pipes, but the breech mechanisms are still live. The turret interiors are packed with decades-old lubricant sludge and residual propellant dust. One spark in the wrong place, and we'd have a catastrophic fire. We had to proceed like we were disarming a bomb while rebuilding a skyscraper. And then, in the third week of demolition, a welder's torch cut through a bulkhead and exposed a safe built into the armor belt, a safe that wasn't on the original ship plans. The combination dial was seized, so we drilled it. What fell out of that safe changed everything I thought I knew about the Valor, and it's why the Navy sent an investigator to the yard the very next morning. The man who walked into the yard had no uniform, but he carried a badge that made Frank go pale: Naval Criminal Investigative Service. He asked to see the safe and everything we pulled from it. Patricia stood in his way and demanded a warrant. He laughed but didn't push it. He said he'd be back with federal marshals if we didn't cooperate. That's when I realized this wasn't just history. It was a crime scene we'd accidentally unearthed. Let me show you what was actually in that safe. It wasn't gold or classified weapons blueprints. It was something far more dangerous: the ship's real identity. You see, the Valor never existed. The brass plate on the stern said USS Valor BB-71, but that hull number was never commissioned. The safe held the original builder's plate, USS Kentucky BB-66. If you know your battleship history, the Kentucky was supposed to be the 5th Iowa-class vessel. Laid down in 1942, never finished. Scheduled for scrapping in 1958. A ship that was officially cut up and sold for 87 cents a pound. But the safe told a different story. Inside was a logbook dated 1964, recording a top-secret completion order issued under the Kennedy administration. The Kentucky had been finished in absolute secrecy at a dry dock in Pascagoula, Mississippi, then operated as a black-budget platform for 17 missions across the Caribbean and South Atlantic. The log listed sonar experiments, electronic surveillance runs, and one operation I still can't speak about without clearance. When the program ended in 1971, they faked the scrapping records and stashed the ship in the Mobile Reserve Fleet under a false name, buried between cargo hulks. Then they just forgot about her. I had a ship that officially did not exist. A presidential black project wrapped in 60,000 tons of armor. The NCIS agent knew it. And now I knew it. The question wasn't whether I could restore the ship, it was whether they'd let me. The next morning, the agent returned, this time with 2 civilians from the Defense Intelligence Agency. They offered me a deal: surrender all findings, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and they'd let me keep the ship as a museum piece, provided I never revealed its real history. They said it was a matter of national security, even 50 years later. I told them I needed 24 hours to think. They gave me 6. While they waited at Frank's office, Patricia and I went back into the ship. If I was going to give it up, I wanted to know everything first. We traced the secret compartment further and found a second space, a control room filled with dismantled electronics that definitely weren't from the 1940s. Radar processors, cryptography decks, cable runs that fed up to a retractable mast concealed inside the forward funnel. It was an intelligence-gathering suite. And taped to the back of a console was a Polaroid photograph of a man I recognized. John F. Kennedy, standing on the deck of this very ship, shaking hands with an officer whose face had been scratched out. On the back, a date, November 15, 1963, 7 days before Dallas. We had just discovered an assassination-era clandestine platform, and the Navy wanted to erase it again. I had to decide whether to fight them and risk losing everything or let history vanish. But then Patricia found the audio tape. The tape was an analog reel-to-reel, stored in a vacuum-sealed canister that had preserved it perfectly for 5 decades. We rigged a playback deck from an old recorder Frank had in his office. The audio was scratchy, but the voices were unmistakable. It was a briefing, held inside that very control room. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Maxwell Taylor, was speaking. He was explaining to President Kennedy the ship's actual mission, not intelligence gathering, but something called Operation Broken Mirror, a contingency plan for a nuclear false flag. The Kentucky had been outfitted to launch a captured Soviet missile from international waters toward a U.S. territory. The intended target was Guantanamo Bay. The plan was to blame the Soviets and trigger a full-scale invasion of Cuba. The scratched-out officer in the Polaroid was the mission commander. According to the tape, Kennedy refused to activate the operation. He ordered the ship mothballed immediately. The officer, furious, was later identified as the man who'd oversee the cover-up for decades. We now knew why the Navy wanted to wipe the Kentucky from history. It wasn't just a secret warship. It was a failed coup attempt waiting to be exposed. The 6 hours were almost up. I had a choice: hand over everything and let the government bury Operation Broken Mirror forever, or make the tape public. If I released it, I'd lose the ship immediately. They'd seize it as classified material and probably charge me under the Espionage Act. I'd be tied up in court for years. Patricia argued we should leak it anonymously, put the audio online and let the press do the rest. But I had spent months bleeding and burning myself on that ship. I wasn't going to walk away empty-handed. I decided to make them a counteroffer. I would surrender the original tape and all documents, sign a non-disclosure agreement with no time limit, and never mention the ship's real history. In exchange, they would release the Valor to me with a clean title, no further interference, and a written guarantee that I could operate her as a civilian museum vessel. And I wanted one more thing: a letter from the Navy formally declassifying her existence, just enough so I could legally own her without future harassment. The DIA agents weren't happy. They stepped outside to make a call. Patricia and I sat in silence for 47 minutes. When they came back, they agreed. The cover-up was more important than the ship. I had a deal. That was the moment the restoration truly began. But we weren't turning a rusted hulk into a floating museum for tourists. We were rebuilding a ghost ship that had nearly ignited World War III, and nobody could ever know. I hired a team of veterans, former Navy engineers who understood the gravity of the work without being told. We had to make the Valor look legitimate, strip every piece of the clandestine hardware, forge believable historical plaques, fabricate a fake service record that aligned with a phantom battleship. Patricia led the hull work, while a historian named Ellis crafted a convincing backstory about a canceled Iowa-class hull that had been secretly completed as a training ship. We were building a lie inside a warship, and every welded seam had to be perfect. Because if the public ever discovered what the Kentucky really was, the entire project would collapse. And someone, somewhere, was still watching to make sure that never happened. For the next 18 months, we lived under that shadow. Every new weld felt like a lie. Every faked service plaque we bolted to the bulkheads was a reminder that one wrong word could bring federal agents back to the yard. Patricia and the crew worked miracles. They rebuilt the 16-inch turrets not to fire, but to rotate and elevate like they were still hungry for battle. We overhauled 2 of the 8 boilers, just enough to push the ship to 10 knots, not the 35 knots she could do in her prime, but enough to move under her own power for the first time in 40 years. The engines coughed black smoke on the trial run, and that sound, the deep, guttural thrum of steam turbines, made every one of us stop and just listen. We had resurrected a ghost. The day of the ceremonial harbor cruise, we had over 3,000 people lining the Mobile waterfront. Veterans in ball caps from other ships, families, local news crews, all of them believing they were watching a restored museum piece named Valor. No one knew they were standing in the shadow of a warship that had almost ended the world. I stood on the bridge wing as we eased away from the pier, the water churning under the stern. I looked down at the foredeck and thought about that scratched-out officer in the Polaroid. I wondered if he was still alive. I wondered if he was watching. The cruise was flawless. We steamed out into Mobile Bay, turned starboard at the sea buoy, and let the ship breathe. For 2 hours, we were just a crew and a ship like any other. But when we came back alongside the dock, I noticed an old man in a wheelchair near the gangway. He wasn't with any of the tour groups. He just sat there, wearing a faded navy jacket with the Kentucky's original crest, a crest that was never commissioned. My heart stopped. I walked down to him, and before I could speak, he pressed a small box into my hand. Inside was a compact cassette tape and a set of captain's bars, tarnished but authentic. He looked me straight in the eye and said 3 words, "She's yours now." Then he wheeled himself away into the crowd and vanished. I never saw him again. That cassette is still in my safe. I haven't played it. I don't know if I ever will. But I do know this. The Valor isn't just a battleship I bought for $9,000. She's a vault of stories the world was never meant to hear. And maybe that's exactly why she found me. That moment on the dock changed everything I believed about the Valor. Somebody had been waiting decades for the right person to inherit that ship, and somehow that person was me. The old man's captain bars sit on my desk now. The cassette is still sealed. I haven't listened to it because once I do, there's no going back. Some stories don't belong to you until you're ready to carry them. Here's what I've learned from this entire insane journey. History doesn't just live in textbooks. It's buried under rust in salvage yards, welded inside watertight doors, and guarded by men who have spent 50 years keeping secrets they never wanted to keep. The Valor isn't just my ship. She's a monument to things we almost did and nearly became. And the scariest part, she's not the only one. There are more ghost ships out there, more sealed safes, more forgotten black operations rusting quietly while the world moves on. I'm Mark, and this is only the beginning. If you want to see what's on that tape when I finally press play, hit subscribe and ring the bell. And tell me in the comments, if you found a cassette that could rewrite history, would you listen? Big thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.